Professor Horror has something to tell you about flying in an aeroplane, which most of you must have done. And it's probably, if you live in the Americas, it could be United, it could be Delta, it could be Eastern. These are some of the airlines that carry the most passengers. Now you know, I do research on a whole lot of paranormal activities and stories and trying to find out which are the real ones, and then I give them to you in this Professor Horror YouTube channel and elsewhere. Let me tell you, if you've traveled Eastern Airlines, then they have on record one of the most mysterious stories. It has to do with the TriStar 318 plane of Eastern taking flight with 180 passengers in the plane, apart from the flight crew, on its way from New York to Florida. And the flight is going okay, normally. Faye Merriweather was the air hostess who gets up and moves towards the back of the flight where they're making arrangement for breakfast for the passengers. She puts her hand towards the oven to keep the food fresh and warm, and a loud scream comes out of her because a face seems to be peeping from behind the door of the oven. Can you believe that? How can that be possible? A face in the oven staring at her. She closed her eyes out of fear. She opened them again. She found no one in the oven. And she decided to take the tray of breakfast from the oven and reach for the door, but the same face peeped out again. Oh my God, it's like a horror movie. But those are stories that are made up. But this was happening to Faye Merriweather on this Eastern Airline TriStar 318 flight. Her lips, the face kept peeping and looking from inside the oven. The lips were moving as if he was saying something. But Faye could not understand and ran up to the place where flight engineer Moore was sitting. Both came back to the kitchen area. The face was still there. Both Moore and Faye distinctly heard what the man was trying to tell them. He was saying, "Be careful! Be careful! This jet is catching fire!" Saying this, the face disappeared. But Moore recognized the face. It was that of the last flight engineer, Don Repo, who had been killed in an accident. But of course, at that time, no one believed what the ghost of John Repo was telling them. The plane developed some defects in the engine after a couple of hours on the journey to Mexico and had to be brought back to New York for repairs. After setting right the defects, the plane was given a flight test, and it is during this flight test the jet engine on the plane disintegrated in the air with a loud bang. So the ghost of Don Repo, the earlier flight engineer, was telling the truth. The aviation authorities of Eastern and the American authorities said that if those precautions had not been taken to bring back the plane for repairs, it might have ended in a calamity with many lives gone. Don Repo had lost his life in 1972 on flight number 401 of a Lockheed L-101 TriStar, and along with him his pilot Bob Luft, and 97 passengers died in that unlucky plane. Pilot Bob Luft was also seen many times after his death on many flights. Lockheed Corporation used the undamaged part of the above accident-affected plane in their new planes. The kitchen area where the oven was located was part of that plane in which both Don Repo and Bob Loft lost their lives. It is now fitted in the plane in which Faye Merriweather saw the face of Don Repo from behind the glass of the oven. Ooh, this is what we call poltergeistic activity. And it started in 1973. The vice president of Eastern Airlines was traveling by TriStar 318. In which a lot of parts salvaged from the old accident-affected plane had been used. The captain, wearing full uniform of Eastern Airlines, was sitting by his side. In their conversation, suddenly looked at the face of the captain intently. How can that be possible? Pilot Bob Loft, who he knew had died a year back, and was sitting with him now. He rushed to the cockpit. The other members of the crew came running, but by that time the ghost of Bob Loft had disappeared. The Eastern Airlines vice president could not understand it. And on another occasion, when the flight engineer of TriStar 318 entered the cockpit to see if everything was all right before the flight, who does he see but the ghost of Don Repo sitting on his seat in full uniform? He was checking the instruments, and he vanished, informing the other flight engineer that he found everything fine. Another officer heard the story of Don Repo checking the instrument panel. He decided to check the instruments personally of the return flight from Miami to Atlanta. And when he entered the cockpit to do so, there was the ghost of Don Repo, checking all the instruments with great attention and sincerity. The Eastern Airlines actually issued security directions to its pilots in the year 1974. And in the manual, they specifically mentioned the presence of Don Repo and Bob Loft on the plane. This was done so that the crew members did not get unnerved on seeing their faces. They were just harmless ghosts trying to be of help and to be useful in their own ways. But people are afraid at the sudden sight of ghosts. So special prayers were conducted on flight on TriStar 318 after 18 months after the death of Don Repo and Bob Loft. And since then, their ghosts have not been sighted on the plane. It looks like the prayers for their peaceful repose have worked. But many who heard of this flight choose not to travel by that plane out of fear. There are certain intriguing aspects of the story. Repo and Loft died in an air accident in 1972. Another 97 other members of crew and passengers together perished with them. Why only the ghosts of Repo and Loft were seen? What about the other ghosts, the other victim? You know, when it comes to the supernatural, no logic prevails. There is no logic to ghostly appearances and what happens in the supernatural sphere. Think about that as I leave you, Professor Horror, going back to his research on real-life supernatural studies.